All right, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this early morning session, and thank you for getting up early and coming and enjoying breakfast.
They might just be rolling in from the club. This is Aspen.
Yeah, but it's not Tel Aviv. So we have a wonderful session here with Dan Buettner, who's written on blue zones and has thought a lot about different ways that are required to make us healthy. We're going to do the session and divide it roughly in half, which is 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes, Dan and I will be in conversation talking about his findings, his research, and his ideas. And the last 30 minutes or so, and that's pretty rough, we will open it up for your questions and hope to engage you fully in the conversation. There will be plenty of time for people to get in their questions, I assure you. And I also want to remind people that Dan is going to do a book signing in the corner there right after our session for his books, and I think you'll be quite eager to read the book when we finish. So I want to start with the basics. You titled the book Blue Zones. What the hell is a blue zone? And why are they blue? I keep getting this question. I tell my brothers, I'm talking about blue zones. What's blue?
It's not their hair. So this was a project of National Geographic. It began about 12 years ago. And it began with the widely acknowledged assumption that only about 20% of how long you live is dictated by your genes. The other 80% is lifestyle and environment. So knowing that, the idea was if we could just find the parts of the world where we know people are living the longest, that we could perhaps reverse engineer longevity. And I was working with a team of demographers in Sardinia, highlands of Sardinia, the first blue zone. And they were using census data to zero in on an area, 14 villages, about 42,000 people, highlands of Sardinia. And on a map, as they were getting closer, they were drawing concentric circles in blue ink. So they just started calling the area inside the blue circle the blue zone. And that term stuck, and we have since now applied it to 5 other areas.
Can you remind people where Sardinia is?
But yeah, sorry about that. So these are the 5 blue zones here. Sardinia is about 125 miles off the coast of Italy in the Mediterranean. It's an island of 1.4 million people. And there's where the longest lived men on the planet reside. It's largely a Bronze Age culture that was pushed up in the highlands at about the time of Christ. And there are about 10 times as many male centenarians among that population as you'd expect to see in an equivalent American population. The longest lived women on the planet live in Okinawa, about 800 miles south of Tokyo. And among women over 60, you see about 30 times more female centenarians. The whole longevity situation has flip-flopped since the Americans have put their military base there just after World War II. But that's another story. And then we found blue zones off the coast of Turkey on the island of Ikaria. And interestingly there, they not only live about 8 years longer than Americans do, but they have about 1/5 the rate of dementia. If you manage to make it to age 85 in this country, there's about a 50% chance you're suffering from dementia. In Ikaria, it's about a 10%. So they not only live a long time, they stay sharp to the very end. And then in Latin America and Costa Rica, working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we found an area called the Nicoya Peninsula. It's about 100 miles long, just south of Nicaragua. And interestingly there, people have, middle-aged people have about half the rate of middle-age mortality. In other words, they're about 2.5 times more likely to reach a healthy age 90 than Americans are, which is extraordinary because this was a third world country not too long ago. It's where the Contras hung out during the Reagan administration. I know most of you aren't old enough to remember the Reagan administration, but he was the president a few times. But what's most extraordinary, they spend about 1/15 the amount we do on health care. yet they yield much better health, both cardiovascular health, rates of diabetes, rates of cancer. And it sort of refutes this notion that you have to be rich to be healthy, something I believe dearly in. And then in the United States, well, we named the Blue Zone in an area southeast of Los Angeles, Loma Linda, California, the highest concentration of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. Adventists are Methodists, fundamentalist Methodists, who distinguish themselves from other Christians in that, number one, they evangelize with health, and number two, they celebrate their Sabbath not on Sunday, but on Saturday. And from sunset on Friday night till sunset on Saturday night, they close down everything. And no matter what their social schedule is telling them to do, no matter what work is telling them to do, for 24 hours they focus on their family. At night, they have the religious services in the morning, and then in the afternoon they have plant-based potlucks, and they take nature hikes. And they do this every week, not just for a couple months when they're excited about it, but for years, decades, or even a lifetime. And interestingly also, they take their diet directly from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, I'm not a big Bible reader, but I read it for this story. God points out that he or she has provided all trees that bear fruit and all plants that bear seeds. So you look at the Adventist diet, and indeed, it's plant-based. The longest-lived Americans from the Adventist Health Study are either pescatarians, which are vegans who eat up to 1 serving of fish a day, or vegans. And Adventists pretty much follow that pattern, and indeed, they're living about 10 years longer than their North American counterparts.
So, Dan, I want to ask you a question. When I was growing up, I remember every so often we would hear out of the Soviet Union, then the Soviet Union, now Russia, the Caucasus, they've got this lady, she's 120 odd years. The Caucasus aren't here.
Yeah. Well, it turns out they were basically lying about their ages. It turns out that
There's a little forgetfulness, a little Alzheimer's.
There's a little bit of that. Well, this happens in a few places, like Vilcabamba Valley of Ecuador, the same thing, and the Hunza Valley. But interesting, in the Caucasus, so at the time of Stalin, he used to send his functionaries down to recruit for the army, and these clever villagers figured out they could just pay off the guy in City Hall to change their birth certificate. Maybe it might have been 25, but change their birth date so they appeared to be 45, and then the draft would pass them over. And these people were so afraid that when researchers came back, actually from National Geographic, 1974, Alexander Leaf, they were too scared to admit they were actually 30 years younger than they really were. But that didn't stop the researchers from writing up.
And if I remember correctly, the oldest lived woman was in France. Is that correct?
Yeah, Marie Calmet. She established the lifespan of the human species 120 years and 4 months, 122 years and 4 months. And
But there's no blue zone in France.
No blue zone in France.
Okay. Are these the only 5 blue zones in the world?
I think they're all the only 5. And it took enormous work, and again, it was a huge grant from National Geographic. In order to find these places, you have to have access to census data for the entire Earth. And you find places that you think are long-lived, and you take a swath of births, say between 1905 and 1915, and you have to follow all those births either till death or immigration, and then you essentially do the math. And it was a painstaking job, but you really can't base a study on longevity on anything but something that is statistically underpinned, and these all are with great rigor.
Well, I'm going to make a dramatic assumption here that none of us were born or live in one of those 5 areas. Could be wrong. So what do these 5 areas do that's special? You've mentioned some of them, the vegan diet, maybe the Sabbath of the Seventh-day Adventists.
Yes.
Are there commonalities? Are there differences because they're richer in Loma Linda than they are in Sardinia? What have you figured out about the secrets of the blue zones?
So in all honesty, I struck off, and I hope I'd find some magic herb or some compound that explained longevity. But the reality is that no matter where you go and people are living a long time, the uniform observation is none of them ever tried. None of these centenarians who could stand on their head at 102 or take down a 26-year-old in karate or still was water skiing, ever tried to live to be 100. They never got on a longevity diet when they were 50 and said, "Go darn it, I'm going to get healthy." They never bought a treadmill or joined a gym or called an 800 number. Longevity happened to them. In other words, I mean, in America, we tend to look at health as something that we pursue. We're going to work really hard, buck up, have discipline, live longer. But in these blue zones, they have no idea how they live so long because longevity ensued. They lived in environments that made the healthy living the default. And we found 9 common denominators. No matter where you go around the world and people are living a long time, they're not looking at physical excuse me, longevity expert dies.
We have a lot of doctors in the audience, I know. They will not let you die.
That'd be funny.
I'll pound your chest for you. Just be assured.
We'll wait for after Zeke. So they don't really think of exercise.
By the way, you're not 75 yet, so it just couldn't happen.
Okay. So by the way, exercise, I hate to say it, and this is a bit of a heresy, exercise has been an unmitigated public health failure in this country. We've been pounding it and spending billions of dollars for the last 70 years trying to get people to exercise, but yet obesity continues to rise, and the average American exercises burns fewer than 100 calories a day engaged in exercise. In blue zones, they live in places where every time they go to work or they go to a friend's house or they go out to eat, it occasions a walk. Their houses are deconvenienced. They haven't engineered all the physical activity out of it. There's not a button to push for yard work and another button to push for housework and another button to push for kitchen work. They're kneading that bread by hand or grinding the corn. So they're nudged into physical activity every 20 minutes or so, which not only burns a lot more calories than your half hour in the gym, but also keeps their metabolisms higher. They tend to have gardens, so they're nudged out every day for that gentle, low-intensity physical activity. And if they do willful physical activity, it's almost always walking, something you can do till you're 90 or 100. In fact, the Surgeon General was just saying yesterday that if you can manage to walk just 20 minutes a day, your chances of diabetes go down by 30% and cardiovascular disease go down by 40%. And these people live in places where that just comes with the day.
I think the official recommendation by the U.S. government is 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise. That's the
so 20 minutes
goal.
times 7 days. Yeah, it's pretty close.
30 minutes, 5, whatever. Yes.
We know the doctor. So second common denominator is they take time to downshift. They suffer from the same stresses that we do. And by the way, every major age-related disease has its root in chronic inflammation. The worry, the hurry of our lives, it's part of the human conditions. In blue zones, they suffer from the same kind of human condition that we do. But they have rituals that help reverse that. They spend some time praying every day. Naps are common. Just taking a nap a day reduces your chance of cardiovascular disease by 33%. The Costa Ricans and the Icarians, they take time for happy hour, ancestor veneration. They have actually a vocabulary for purpose. Do you know statistically speaking, the most dangerous year of your life?
Birth.
You're right, birth. But the second most, infant mortality. Second most dangerous year of your life is actually the year you retire. There's about a 3-fold spike in mortality. You're 3 times more likely to die the year you retire as compared to your last year of work.
You also get more stupid, actually.
That's
mental acuity goes down.
And you ask yourself, well, why is that? Do you start smoking crack or why? Well, it turns out, when you're young, you have your kids, you have your job to keep you engaged, but then when that all goes away, and we live in a culture that doesn't particularly celebrate older people, in blue zones, there's actually vocabulary for purpose. Okinawans have a word ikigai, which means roughly the reason for which I wake up in the morning. Older people are expected to continue to give back, and they're honored, so they stay engaged. They have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, get out of the easy chair, use those decades of accumulated wisdom and apply it for good. And it turns out there's a virtuous circle there. They don't experience that spike in mortality the last year of work. When it comes to what they eat, this is good news for most, especially in Aspen here. They drink a little bit. And we know that people who drink actually live longer than those people who don't drink at all. But the catch is you can only have 2, maybe 3 a day. In one of our blue zones, it was 3 a day. And you cannot save up all week long and have 24 on the weekend. Interestingly, it's mostly wine. And it turns out that if you drink a good red wine with a plant-based meal, a Mediterranean diet or blue zone diet, it actually about triples the flavonoid absorption. So there's even an argument to be made that it's healthier to drink a little glass of wine with your meal than even water. I just finished another book, The Blue Zone Solution. It took me 3 years, and we worked with the University of Minnesota to do a meta-analysis of the diets of longevity. So if you want to know what to eat to be 100, I argue you have to know what these centenarians were eating their whole lives. Most dietary studies, they're asking these centenarians, well, what did you eat, last week? And you can't expect people to remember. If I asked you what you had for lunch a week ago Tuesday, you probably couldn't tell me. So how can you expect a centenarian to remember what they were eating when they were 10 and 25 and 30 and 40, et cetera? So our team found 155 dietary surveys done over the past century in all 5 of these blue zones, and roughly we averaged them out. And we found that no matter where you go in the world and people are living a long time, between 90 and 100% of their diet is plant-based. Some lowly processed or not processed, whole food plant-based. You see high amounts of whole grains, kind of flies right in the face of this paleo craze. Sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes were the main food source for Okinawans, Okinawan centenarians for the first 60 years of their lives. They called them emos. And then greens. We found out that people were eating about 1/4 cup of greens per day. Somebody should turn off their damn phone. Sorry about that.
I meant to say that at the start. I forgot.
Sorry about that. So grains, sweet potatoes, and greens. But the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world, anybody want to take a guess?
Yogurt.
Water, yogurt. Close. It's coming up. It's beans. No matter where you go in the world, people living a long time, they're eating about 1 cup of beans a day. It probably yields them an extra 4 years of extra life expectancy. Every 2 extra ounces of beans you add to your diet, you lower your rate of your mortality rate by about 9%. And indeed, in blue zones, Okinawa, it's soybeans. In Sardinia and Ikaria, it's chickpeas and lentils. In Nicoya, it's black beans. But their main protein source is beans. And we're not sure if there's something, the fiber in beans or the nutrients in beans, or if because they're eating beans, they're therefore not eating the other less healthy protein.
Dan, I want to interrupt you for a second. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, there was an article, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, since time is speeding up, in the New England Journal, where they looked back at the nurses' health study, the physicians' health study, where they followed healthcare professionals out for a number of years, and they looked at their diets, where they had collected a lot of dietary information on them over years, and they then correlated, and it's only a correlation study, between what they ate and then adverse health outcomes, whether it was stroke or heart attacks or deaths or cancer. And if I remember that article correctly, and I do remember at least this part of the article correctly, the absolute single worst thing you could eat was any form of potato. Potato chips, mashed potatoes, baked potatoes, French fries. the best thing you could eat, the two best things you could eat, number one was yogurt, and number two was nuts, and someone had mentioned nuts. Not on your list, but
I'm not done with my list.
Oh, sorry. This looked pretty comprehensive. I'm already full.
Yeah. So that was, that study was done in the United States, which isn't a particularly long-lived country as a whole. So that's a little flaw in that premise. But also, my only assertion here is this is what the world's longest lived people, and there's lots of ways to come at the sort of dietary questions. We've lots of great experts at this conference who are looking at the cellular level. I look at it from the population level and just kind of reverse engineer it. They do eat meat, but not very much, about 5 times per month, and 4 of those times the portion of meat is no bigger than the size of this clicker. It's a condiment more than a main food. Fish, a lot less than you'd think, fewer than 3 times a week, but they do eat it. No cow's dairy in any blue zones.
Really?
No cows.
No cheese in Sardinia?
Well, a lot of cheese, but it's goat and sheep cheese. Pecorino is the big cheese there. And metabolically, they're fairly different than cow's dairy. So, and they do eat yogurt. Yogurt in both Sardinia and Icaria, Greece. Very good, but it's always made from goat's milk, different than cow's milk. Indeed, nuts. People who are eating a handful of nuts a day are probably living 2 to 3 years longer than their non-nut eating counterpart. And then what they drink every day, up to 6 glasses of water. Tea, good news for most of us. Coffee is a huge net positive, big source of antioxidants, associated with lower rates of diabetes and Parkinson's. And then also good news for a lot of people, a little bit of wine. This isn't a diet, and I stop at calling this the Blue Zone diets, but it is guidelines. And I would assert they're you'll see Harvard or American Cancer Society, their guidelines will be very similar to this. But the big difference here is people don't consciously eat these foods. It's what they grew up with. And they also love to celebrate, by the way. They don't restrict themselves. If there's a village festival or a wedding or a birthday, they'll slaughter a pig and drink wine all night, eat goat's liver, and if there are sweets, they'll eat a lot of sweets. But their default diet is what you see up here.
Good. We have a few remaining elements to the keys to the blue zones.
So they don't think about what they eat. They have strategies to keep from overeating. Okinawans have a saying, hara hachi bu, which reminds them to quit eating when their stomachs are 80% full. They tend to express gratitude before each meal, so they'll actually pause and put some punctuation before their hurry-worry of their life and before they eat. Makes it more likely that full feeling will travel from their belly to their brain and tell them to stop eating. And they tend to eat a huge breakfast. Breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. And finally, the foundation on which all of this rests, they invest in their families. They tend to put their families first. They keep their aging parents nearby, invest in their kids, and make their spouse a priority as opposed to making work or friends or some sports team. They tend to belong to a faith-based community. I interviewed about 350 centenarians. All but 5 belong to some faith. It didn't seem to matter what faith they belonged to. But if you belong to a faith and show up at least 4 times a month, it adds between 4 and 14 years to your life expectancy. And we don't know if that's because you're less likely to engage in risky behaviors, or if because you have a better social network, or if because you have ritualized stress reduction, or if because there's a God and God said. But it seems to work. There's just a piece in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago kind of confirming this. And then finally, who you hang out with. In these blue zones, people were either born into or intentionally surrounded themselves with the right people who reinforce the right behaviors. We now know that if your 3 best friends are unhealthy and obese, there's about 150% better chance that you'll be overweight yourself. Drinking too much, drugs, unhappiness and even loneliness is contagious. And in these blue zones, the people they surround themselves with tend to eat a plant-based diet. They tend to care about each other. They keep an eye on each other. And it's one of these unconscious influences that exert an entire lifetime. So you add these all up, and it explains about 12 extra years of life expectancy. The maximum average life expectancy of the human population living in the first world right now is about 90. Anybody who tells you they can help you live to 100 probably has their hand in your pocket trying to sell you something. But for an average population living in the United States, you can say, you know what, if you optimize your lifestyle, you should get about 90 years. But in America, we're only getting 79. And people who follow this pyramid here are getting closest to that 90 years of anybody else in the world.
So I just want to ask 3 quick questions before we turn to the audience. First one is, in almost all countries I know, women live longer than men. Is that true in blue zones?
It is in Okinawa, but not in Sardinia and Icaria. So usually in America, for every 1 male centenarian, you have 5 female centenarians.
And the average lifespan of a woman is roughly 4 to 5, in America, 4 to 5 years longer than a man.
Yeah, about that. But making it to 100, it's a lot better chance for a female. The dating pool is very good for male centenarians. But in blue zones, in Icaria and Sardinia and Nicoya, actually the ratio is 1-to-1. So there's the blue zone advantage accrues mostly to men, I think, in these places.
So I know that the title of this session is about eating your way to longevity, and I also noticed that only 3 of your 9 rules, as it were, or guidelines, as you call them, are about diet. Maybe you can help understand how integral the other 6 are, separate from diet.
Yes. So I just mentioned that, sorry about this. It's getting to it. So many slides, such a slow computer. So in the United States right now, we spend a lot of money on healthcare, about $3 trillion, about 17% of our GDP, and most of that is on trying to cure sickness. We do spend some money on prevention, but most of it is spent on diets, exercise programs, and supplements, about $1.9 billion. And they're pretty good ideas. It's a good idea to get people involved with eating the right food and moving. But the problem with all of these strategies that we spend money on is that they work in the short run. You can make a lot of money off of selling them, but they almost always fail in the long run. You start a diet. If I got 100 people to start the Blue Zone diet today, I would lose about 10% of them in just 3 months. I'd lose 90% of them in 7 months, and I'd lose almost all of them in 2 years, 2 or 3 years. So great short-term, unmitigated failure in the long run. Exercise programs have a similar recidivism curve. People tend to join gyms right after the holidays and run out of gas in a few months. And even if I come home from Blue Zones with the pill guaranteed to reverse aging, Americans wouldn't take it long enough to make a difference. What does seem to work in Blue Zones, the Blue Zone way to stick with the right diet has to do with creating a network, a mutually supported network of factors that hold the diet in place. It begins with purpose, this vocabulary of purpose, people knowing their passions, knowing their values, knowing their skills, and having a place to activate those. In this country, it's volunteering. We know that volunteers have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, lower rates of cancer, and they weigh less. They can eat wisely. They eat mostly a plant-based diet. They have the right rituals around eating. They have made their healthy food taste good. I could tell you that broccoli is the secret of longevity, but if you don't like broccoli, you're not going to eat it for long enough to make a difference. And it has to be easy. Their kitchens are set up so it's easy to make the right food for the long run. Like I said, they surround themselves with the right people who eat plant-based, whose idea of recreation is walking or gardening. They're engaged with the world and they care about each other. They don't exercise, but as I mentioned before, their houses are deconvenienced. They have an active commute, and they tend to have dogs. In this country, if you own a dog, your chances of obesity is about half that of your non-dog owning counterparts. And then they live in the right community where, again, it's easier to get plants, fruits, and vegetables than it is to get chips, sodas, fries, and hamburgers. They live in communities where it's easy to walk. They're clean places, that's undeniable. And you're running into your friends all the time. In the United States here, if you have 6 hours of social interactivity, you are among the class of the happiest people in America. We know that loneliness, if you don't have at least 3 good friends you can count on a bad day, it shaves about 8 years off of your life expectancy.
So, Dan, I want to, one of the things that's noticeable here is you haven't said that they have an app that helps them. And I know that we're in Aspen, and we are the most technophilic people in the entire planet here in Aspen. We love technology, and we do think apps solve almost every problem that the world presents. But I noticed you haven't mentioned the word technology once, and if I'm correct, you actually mentioned that the Sardinians are sort of basically Bronze Age people up there. Doesn't seem like this is there's not a lot of technology here. So if anything, it seems a little anti-technology. Deconveniencing your home, get rid of that technology, walk, don't use a lot of technology to get around. What gives?
Well, I can tell you none of these cultures where people live a long time are they using technology. I in fact, think it probably takes us away from living longer, better lives than it does to enhance it.
This is an anti-Aspen message here.
I'd probably be thrown out after this.
All right, I think it would be good to begin with audience questions. And I would ask you, please, to keep the questions short so we can get a lot of them in. Right over here. Hold on, wait for the microphone, and your job is to stand up, introduce yourself, and ask a short, sweet question.
Hi, my name is Melinda. I live here in Aspen. I can see the blue zones that you've described more easily in the places outside of Loma Linda, which I'm familiar with because I grew up in California. How would that community have, without forcing it, a lifestyle that doesn't include driving and a diet that comes naturally, because it's just part of Southern California, which is not a natural no driving and eat that way place?
Great question.
Well, this isn't a fixed price menu, it's an a la carte menu. And these blue zones of those 9 common denominators, they do those 9 things to varying degrees of intensity. So you're right, in Loma Linda, they're going to be driving a lot more. But when it comes to adhering to a plant-based diet, they're going to do way better than, say, the people in San Bernardino or the people in Compton nearby. I mentioned that about loneliness. Loneliness is almost impossible in a Adventist community because everybody's expected to show up to services on Saturday morning. Everybody's expected to show up to the potluck. They organize these afternoon hikes, which is kind of a default. So,
and if I'm not mistaken, on Saturdays they don't drive, they walk.
Yeah, they're a lot less likely to drive on a Saturday.
Okay. In the back right there?
Hi, I'm Jorge Plutsky. I'm a preventive cardiologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. Thank you for a great session. It seems like there's an incredible opportunity to sort out some inputs, although some complexity involved, as people migrate from a blue zone to a red zone, whether they retain their practices or not, or to what extent was it genetic or other issues. Are there studies looking around there? Any insights on that as someone moves away from a blue zone?
Yes, there's several. When Okinawan, one study followed a cohort of Okinawans as they moved to Brazil, and they left their plant-based diet behind and started adopting a beef-based diet, and their life expectancy dropped about 15 years. And also in every one of these blue zones, except maybe the Adventists, the life expectancy is dropping off. The phenomena is disappearing as the American food culture washes over the area and they start mechanizing. So
what happened in Okinawa when the American base after World War II came in?
So, well, this forest of fast food restaurants popped up, and also, because of the USGIs, they developed a taste for Spam. And their tradition...
The best of American culture
Yeah.
and cuisine.
So, you know, when you're eating, it's a fairly, it's a subtle diet. Like the main dish in Okinawa is something called goya champuru, which is made with bitter melon and tofu and vegetables and nice herbs and spices. And you can sit down to what looks like a delicious compost pile of food, and it has a fifth the caloric density of a hamburger. But you have to sort of appreciate that. And then all of a sudden, in comes napalm, Spam, which kind of napalms your taste buds. And they love it every bit as much as we love fat and salt and sugar. And then the fast food restaurants became really accessible, and the diet started shifting over those since 1945 or so. And along with it, the life expectancy has dropped. And the cohort of people who are under 60 actually have the highest rates of cardiovascular disease and cancer in all of Japan. So that's what America's been exporting there.
Great.
Oh,
Over there?
Good morning. My name is Elliot Levy. I'm a retired endocrinologist, but not retired. I changed careers when I retired. Two questions related. You started your talk, which was beautiful, by the way, with great slides, by making the comment that longevity is 20% genetic and 80% environmental. How do you come up with those numbers? And the second question is it too late to make a change at any age to a more healthy lifestyle?
Excellent question.
well, which one was excellent? He asked two.
I like the last one.
Okay, so
The first one's pretty well accepted, I think.
So the 80-20 comes from the Danish twin study, which followed both fraternal twins and identical twins. The identical twins have the identical genes, and they then measured the disparity of when they die, and they've done it over 100 years. And then the second question?
Is it too late?
Yes.
He wants to know how he can save himself.
Yeah.
He wants to live to 100.
No, it's never too late. You can, well, essentially, the longer you live, the healthier you've been. But even if you're 99 years old and you're completely sedentary and you get off the couch or you increase your social connectivity, you can add years to your life expectancy.
I mean, the one thing you haven't added is education, which we know actually, certainly in the United States, heavily correlated with
Yes.
living longer. So, little education, a lot of exercise.
A graduate degree will give you 2 years of extra life expectancy over a undergraduate
Start
degree.
all your
which
PhDs.
is why this is why Zeke will be around for a long time.
My name is Jan from Fort Lauderdale, and we live here too. Two
One
questions.
question, please. There are lots of people who have
Okay,
questions.
the more important
We'll
question.
ration it.
All right. My wife and I are both vegans, and lately soy has come under bad PR. We love edamame, we love tofu and everything, and now we're cutting back. What have you seen on the longevity piece?
Great question.
Yeah, so Okinawans eat about 8 times more tofu than other Japanese. So, I mean, that's anecdotal, but it's a cornerstone. I think a lot of products that we think of as soy here in America really aren't very soy-based, like soy milk, for example. If you look at the ingredients, they're full of sugar. There's this gum that binds it. It's not really pure soy milk. I think if you're eating real soy, especially if it's fermented, like in a real tofu, it's a huge net plus.
Okay.
Yes, Chuck Seisler from the Brigham and Women's Hospital Sleep Health Institute. I was interested in your comment about the naps, and could
The
you
what?
Naps.
napping, and could you comment about sleep in general, and if you found anything?
Chuck is
in
one of the
these
world's leading
blues?
experts on sleep, so be careful.
So, on average, people who make it to 100 sleep about 8 hours a night. on average. And certainly in these blue zones, they tend to go to bed soon after the sun sets, traditionally speaking, and these centenarians tend to continue to have the traditional patterns. And they'll often wake up in the middle of the night, or not quite in the middle, more towards the morning, and they'll wake up for a while, and then they'll go back to sleep. They'll have a second sleep, and then they're usually up around sunrise, and then it's a nap. In Ikaria, interestingly, this place with the really low rates of dementia, most of the year they're staying up to 1 or 2 in the morning, because those are the cool hours of the day, and then they'll sleep really late. They'll open their shops at 10 or 11. They'll go back and take a nap at 4, and then they'll be up really late. So there's some idiosyncrasy, but 8 hours is sort of an average, and a 20 to 30 minute nap in the middle of the afternoon, I would say, generally speaking.
Great. Back there.
Hello, my name is Paul. I'm an Aspen resident. Is there any correlation to healthcare and longevity in these 5 areas?
Well, the ante is good public health. I mean, none of these, except the Loma Linda, California, which has a state-of-the-art hospital, none of these places are places you're going to want to go for a state-of-the-art organ transplant. But they do tend to have better public health, especially Costa Rica. I mentioned that Nicoya has about half the rate of middle-age mortality as we do in the United States. Everybody in that country has access to a health coach. Every single year, somebody's going to come knock on your door. They're going to ask, is anybody pregnant here? They're going to look around to see if there are people who might be at risk of diabetes or starting to suffer from obesity or maybe suffering from dementia. Right away do a spot check or a spot test and be able to get people in for help before it's a 911 emergency, like in this country where you have to give them expensive treatment.
There are good studies in the United States that even in our country, health care services, coming to the doctor, is good for 10 or maximum 20% of improvement in life expectancy and things like that. It really isn't about healthcare services. You know, genetics is a small amount, but lifestyle is the dominant thing still. Yeah. Wait for the microphone and stand up and introduce yourself. Stand up and introduce yourself.
Hi.
I'm under strict orders here, strict orders.
Jeff J. from Greenwich, Connecticut. You mentioned red wine triples the absorption of flavonoids. Others have talked about red wine having resveratrol as an agent that also is something is correlated with longevity. Do you think there's a benefit to that compound in the red wine?
I don't think resveratrol is that important. I mean, to get this sort of effective dose, you'd have to drink several bottles of wine a day, and there'd be other problems with that. But it's probably the alcohol, and it's probably the ceremony that surrounds the alcohol, which tends to be really social. It tends to be with a meal. It tends to be administered in smaller doses throughout the day. In Sardinia, for example, you'll see people at 10 a.m. having a first little tiny, maybe just 2 or 3 ounces of wine, and another 2 or 3 ounces with lunch, and 2 or 3 ounces with friends. Interestingly, in Sardinia, they produce, in a few vineyards, the wines with the highest levels of polyphenols in the world. It's called Cananao. It's made from a Grenache grape. You can get it in this country. And I just always kind of had fun with the correlation between the longest lived men and the best wine.
By the way, you might want to ask GSK, the drug company, which bought the rights for $750 million to resveratrol and has wiped them off their books because nothing has come of it.
It doesn't work.
I think in the back there.
My name is Peter. I'm curious if you did any studies on the water quality of the blue zones versus other geographies.
I can only respond anecdotally. And you ask these people, if you ask these old guys, these 100-year-olds that sit around the square, how they explain longevity, they almost always say clean air, clean water, and good food. So I often find there's an element of truth in these sort of time-honored adages you hear over and over again, but our study did not check water quality. The only place we looked into water was in the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. And so you have Costa Rica, does pretty well when it comes to longevity, but Nicoya is a big outlier. They live significantly longer. So we're looking, well, what's different about Nicoya that isn't like the rest of the main part of Costa Rica? And it turns out that most of Costa Rica is volcanic, but Nicoya is like the Caribbean. It's limestone. And the water that percolates through, that's the people drink there, has very high levels of calcium and magnesium. And they get lots of sunshine. So it's just drinking this water throughout their life, it probably amounts to taking this supplement. We know if you take, I'll ask you, Zeke, sunshine and calcium, what does that equal over a lifetime?
Better bones. It's
There you
actually,
go.
it's vitamin D, right?
Well, which comes from
Yeah.
good sunshine.
Yeah.
So we don't know this for sure, but it was an interesting connection. Magnesium is also good for the heart.
Over there, was there a question? Wait for the mic and stand up, please.
Hi, I'm Kate Lear. I know
We're
him.
friends.
We're friends.
Uh-oh, a planted question.
No, it's not actually. What role does genetics play? Because you had mentioned genetics, and I'm wondering if these are communities that are close together. Does that play a role?
Okay, so all of the populations except Sardinian are heterogeneous populations. In other words, they're melting pots. Okinawa, for example, been intermarrying with the rest of Southeast Asia for the last 400 years. And Adventists are black and Hispanic and Asian. And Sardinia is the only one that has perhaps a unique set of genes. When thinking about genes, most of us lie on a spectrum. There'll be a tiny percentage of us who could do everything right, eat bean sprouts and tofu and run every day and have great social life and drop dead at 40 because of some bizarre cancer. And then there are people at the other end of the spectrum who can drink a fifth of whiskey and smoke and they live to 100 and they give longevity a bad name. But most of us are 1 or 2 standard deviations from the mean, meaning that we have the potential to make it to 80 or 90 by optimizing our lifestyle and environment. And that's what I try to do is articulate the ideal lifestyle environment for us to emulate, given an average set of genes.
Until CRISPR, we're not going to do a lot about genes anyway. So, it's like what you can control is these other factors that Dan has pointed out. Over here.
Hello, Surya from Bank of America. The move naturally comment. So does that mean gym is not good, or going to the gym is just a drop off and walking is more sustainable?
Gym is good for some people, but I think it's folly to think that we can sit in our office chairs for 8 hours a day and then go to the gym for a half hour and get enough physical activity. We evolutionarily evolved to be moving all the time. That's and like I said, in blue zones, they're moving every 20 minutes or so. I'm going to take a slight deviation here and answer your question in a longer way. So about 9 years ago, we started thinking about, could you make a blue zone in America? Could you actually make an American population live longer? And I got a huge grant from AARP and help from National Geographic, and we auditioned 5 cities to see if we could actually take an American population and help them live longer. We gave them all a test. We used Gallup's tool that measured life expectancy. And then we went about trying to change the environment so people would mindlessly, invisibly live longer. So instead of trying to change people's behavior, which is almost always a failure, change their environment. So I hired a bunch of smart people, Stanford and Harvard, University of Minnesota, and they pointed out that most of us live most of our lives within about 5 miles of our home. We call that a life radius, and we went about optimizing that. No technology, Zeke, here. And we got some data from the CDC who told us that if you want to optimize people's environment to live longer, the most cost-effective tool is changing policy. So it essentially boils down to this. Do you live in an environment where fruits and vegetables are cheapest and most accessible, or do you live in a place where every time you go anywhere you're going through a gauntlet of sugar-sweetened beverages, sodas, or junk food, or fast food restaurants? If you live in a neighborhood of 5-mile radius, or half a mile radius where there are more than 6 fast food restaurants, you're 30% more likely to be obese than if you live in a place where there are fewer than 3. Built environment. If you live in a place where parks are cleaned up, where streets are designed not just for cars but also for humans, you have bike lanes, you make it walkable, you can raise the physical activity level of the entire city by 30%. You don't have to give people gym memberships or get them to take yoga or give them a free t-shirt for joining the yoga class. We know that in any community about 60% of people are ready to change their health behaviors but don't have the tools. And by just putting them together and creating social networks, helping them find those 3 good friends that they can count on a bad day, that's a long-term intervention. The fourth part about it, it turns out that there's enormous possibility in changing the policies and the designs of buildings. Restaurants, grocery stores, schools, workplaces. You can design those so they're about 20 to 30% healthier by changing the defaults. And again, you put them in place once and you can just forget about them. And then helping people find their sense of purpose and a place to put that to work. And in our first city, Albert Lea, Minnesota, by taking this approach, we were actually able to raise life expectancy after 2 years by about 3.2 years, lower healthcare costs, and that model has now been scaled to 26 cities around the country, and it seems to be working very well.
You had a question?
I'm Sylvia Blau, part-time Aspen. You mentioned red wine. How about white wine? or is it the...
and is it Riesling or Sauvignon Blanc?
Or is it the socialness around the drinking? Or does it matter if it's white or red?
There may be some tiny advantage to drinking red wine over white wine, but it's probably, quite honestly, the alcohol in the wine. So.
And you also mentioned the social activity that breeds.
The ceremony that tends to go around.
Yeah. Over here. Oops. Well, wait. No one question. We are getting to the end, and there are a number of people who would like to ask questions.
I read recently in the Los Angeles Times that there was a 6th blue zone, and it was Manhattan Beach. And is there a country that's number 1?
Well, oddly enough, Manhattan Beach is one of our blue zone projects, one of the 26 cities. So they're a blue zone certified city, but they're not exactly a blue zone. But they took this, they adopted this over the past 5 years, and they've seen a 50% drop in childhood obesity in the last 5 years, and the average BMI of that city's dropped by about 17%, which equates to
it also doesn't hurt that they're on the Pacific Ocean, and it's quite beautiful.
Believe it or not, they're in the Pacific, but you go back about 2 blocks, and their obesity rates and their general health is no better than the average California. If you live on the beach and you're a millionaire and you play volleyball, those guys live longer.
There's a question here.
Yes, Dick Corbett from Tampa, Florida. I wanted to ask you about the supplements and the vitamins that the whole country is so hooked on this. None of these areas, I assume, have any of this.
Correct. In no blue zones are people taking supplements, but I think they're getting them from their food and their water that we might not be getting them.
Okay, now along with that, are there any supplements that certain doctors would say you ought to take?
I'll let Zeke answer that one because he's a doctor.
Well, one of the, I would say in general, a lot of people think that they're very expensive and they end up coming out in your pee mostly. The one I would suggest, especially if you're not heavy into fish, either flaxseed oil or fish oils are probably worth the money. And since you look like you're pretty well healed, you're here in Aspen, taking something that isn't on a negative side, and there are some which are on the negative side. I mean, vitamin E definitely don't do. We have good data that that's not good. Multivitamin probably not that valuable at all. But so you take it, no downside. Maybe it will help. a lot of these have not really been rigorously studied, which is a main problem with the supplement industry in general. And many of you may know that thanks to certain senators from certain states, it's not FDA regulated, the nutritional supplements. So there can be some serious problems, and we've had serious public health problems with some of them.
So I would say, by the way, the Blue Zone lesson would suggest instead of taking the fish oil and the flaxseed oil,
just eat the fish.
Just eat the fish and put flax seeds in your smoothie.
So Bob Thoburn in Gainesville, Florida. You haven't mentioned the microbiome. Obesity is a huge problem. There's evidence that some microbes are very effective calorie releasers. So two groups taking the same amount of food, same type food, those with a certain microbiome can get increased obesity just from the increased efficiency of calorie release.
Yes. So I'd say there's something to that. So most of these blue zones, there are fermented foods. We talked about the yogurt in Okinawa, it's pickles. But I think more important than getting the access to the bacterias, Sardinia, it's lactobacillus in the sourdough bread, but it's the mulch. Like eating beans might be good for you because of the fiber, but that fiber creates, let's just say, for using a metaphor, very good soil for those bacteria to flourish. Whereas if you're eating a lot of meat and cheese and drinking sodas, you could take these probiotics all day long, and they're not going to take. So I'd say in blue zones they have the right mix of soil and seed.
Can I ask you, just going to conclude with this question, what about changing your habits and trying to change your habits, and how might that play into sort of adopting more of a blue zone lifestyle?
I don't think changing habits work. I can't find anything in the academic literature that suggests you can change a habit for long enough to make a difference. When it comes to longevity, there's no short-term fix, and we're in a culture that looks for short-term fix. What I argue, and when I do in these cities, and when I argue for individuals, is you have to shape your environment so you're more likely to do the healthy thing than the unhealthy thing, or that the unhealthy thing becomes really hard to do. I'd say one of the biggest things you can do is move to a healthy community, a community where it's easy to walk places and it's easy to get fresh fruits and vegetables, and you're around engaged people. It's very hard to live a long time if you live in a soulless American suburb in Cleveland. I don't mean to pick on Cleveland, but and that's the problem with the way we're designing our cities. We need to redesign our world to mimic these places that have achieved the outcomes we want if we also want to live a long time and attack this $3 trillion a year problem we have with healthcare.
Well, it is interesting that, despite the fact that this was labeled food, and we have talked a lot about eating the right food, it does sound like one of the more important lessons of the blue zones is the social connectedness, a lot of ceremonies that bring people together, that sort of get people moving together, as it were, and create this sort of ceremony around eating, around social life, around activity.
I think of it as like collagen. It's having the right diet we all know what the right thing to eat is, but it's so hard to do it in isolation. But when you surround yourself with the right people, when you have this base of purpose or religion, when you have when you live in a place where it's easy to eat the right foods, when your kitchen is set up the right way, then you don't have to think about it. It's a lot easier to follow the right food patterns that are going to get you to 100.
Well, I want to thank Dan. I want to remind you.
Thank you. Now let's go get a beer and a cigarette.
There's a book signing in the corner there by Dan, and thank you very much for great questions.